Crosspatch Farm, the seventh installment of Curriculum of Grace, a series of articles chronicling God's pursuit of a young man impervious to the teaching of elders. We searched all over the ramshackle farmhouse for a bathroom. There was none to be seen. No outhouse either. Finally, in a little shed-like area attached to the workroom, I found a bench with a hole in it and an acrid 6-foot deep pit underneath. At my mother's insistence, we sought refuge at the inn, a majestic old building with scuffed floors and a curved staircase, a few miles further on the road to Sugarloaf Mountain, where my father planned to go skiing that winter, if the farmhouse could be made livable before then. That was our family project for the summer of 1966, my mother and father and grandfather, my 11-year-old brother, and 17-year-old me. For my brother and me, it was a summer of fond memories. For my mother, an ordeal. For my father, a respite from the cares of the corporate world and maybe a reminder of childhood and barracks housing. We arrived at the inn starving and returned there in the same condition after our chores every night for a fortnight. Mrs. Marshall, the cook, served up country meals, simple, delicious, and plentiful. Emery, who also cleaned rooms and made repairs, waited on us in the big sunny dining room, empty in summer. Most mornings Judge Wing, the owner, would saunter in his overalls to greet us en route to chores at one of his numerous properties. Retired from the bench, he still worked part-time as a lawyer and had represented my father that spring when he purchased the farm. From pithy comments at our morning encounters, we gather he had little patience for grifters and ne'er-do-wells. He wasn't the kind of judge you'd want to be sentenced by. For a boy confined 9 months a year to a boarding school, it was an arduous, sweat-soaked but exhilarating summer. I was given charge of the sleek new gas-powered mower, the first my family had ever owned. With my parents and brother installed downstairs, I got the pick of upstairs bedrooms, and chose a large gloomy room with an archway and alcove, which after many hours stripping wallpaper, spackling, and painting, I managed to transform into a bright, airy retreat. The farm was full of surprises, robin egg shells and dewy grass in the morning, a fawn that gamboled past when I sat in a field reading poetry, even a horse that trotted into our yard returning to where it had once lived. There was a barn aflutter with swallows, with a loft and an enormous pile of manure, a milk shed that housed the lawnmower and our other new tools, and acres of fields, woods, and streams to be explored when I finished the chores assigned by my father. I actually liked working with the family. Aside from mowing the lawn and shoveling snow, I'd never done any physical work. In our house in Boston, with its drapes and classical-themed wallpaper, you couldn't hammer or spackle or paint for fear of marring the work of the decorator. No decorator ever set foot in the farmhouse. Whatever you put your hand to, however ineptly, made the battered, tumble-down place look better. When it came time to paint the outside, I scraped away happily alongside my father and grandfather, intrigued by the way the paint sometimes peeled off in strips, and unfazed if the blade left a gouge in the weather-beaten old clapboards. In due course, I was assigned a task of my own, tearing up the bench and the flooring of that unspeakable back room with its crude wooden toilet. The pit had been filled in by the plumbing crew, but an odor of must and decay lingered. Chunks of wood turned to dust when I attacked them with hammer and pry bar. It was my brother's task to sort the boards into piles, one for the dump, the other for reuse in my father's next project, whatever that turned out to be. He'd groan whenever I brought out a new armful. It was a gross, smelly job, but laying bare the 2x8 floor joists that tied the room to the rest of the ramshackle house, then nailing in sheets of pressed wood my father had ordered for flooring, was incredibly satisfying. My mother dubbed the place Crosspatch Farm, a humorous reference to our clumsy efforts to make it livable that first summer. After 2 years, she gave up on it. Cooking and cleaning in the primitive kitchen were too much. She refused to return. I, on the other hand, would have been content to live all my life there, hammering and sanding, keeping up with eccentric neighbors, eating occasionally at the inn to reconnect with its colorful characters. The 2 summers I spent there as a boy prepared me for a life as erratic and makeshift as the old building itself. It was there that I retreated to heal in my late 20s after 6 years of radical activism. It was there that I was reconciled with my father after a long estrangement. It was there that, in my early 30s, I cultivated a chaste friendship with a troubled teenage girl who decades later I married and who led me to Christ. Did God lead me to Crosspatch Farm? Did God teach me the lessons I learned there? Would I have found Christ if I had never lived there or taught school in a neighboring town where I encountered that girl? God acts in our lives, but his ways are mysterious, and it is hard to distinguish his intervention from 1,000 other people and circumstances that influence us. During my teens and 20s, his influence flowed like an undercurrent, unseen but nonetheless powerful, an irresistible force urging me forward along a path he had laid out for me. The contribution of Crosspatch Farm to the curriculum of grace I experienced in my late teens is not so much what I learned there laboring away with scraper and paintbrush and pry bar, but rather how I used what I learned and how those sultry months in the tumbledown farmhouse consoled and encouraged me and eventually led me to Christ.